Hi there, it's Aston at Moto2N Mobile Repair for Japanese motorcycles and scooters on the Front Range of Colorado. Today we're working on a Honda Forza 300, so a big Maxi scooter. The problem is its belt broke at some point, so it got all shredded and twisted up inside the transmission housing. I've already been out here to remove all of the pieces of the broken belt, so without further ado, we're going to start removing some plastic housings that are covering the transmission cover. Once we get the plastic off, then we can unbolt the transmission cover, then we'll unbolt the variator, unbolt the clutch, fit the belt onto the clutch, and then reinstall the clutch and variator, transmission cover, and then the plastic shrouds. There are two plastic covers covering the transmission housing on the Honda Forza 300. The first fastener you're going to replace is up there toward the top. It's the only Phillips head screw that you're going to remove to do this job. The rest of them are just 5mm Allen bolts, and I'm using an impact to remove them. Once you have all the fasteners removed, the plastic cover just pops right off. The second piece of plastic comes off with 3 5mm Allen bolts. The front two are a little bit longer than the back one, so pay attention to that when you're reinstalling them. Once you have them all off, same thing as the first cover, it pops right off, and now you have the transmission cover is exposed, and we can start working on the 8mm screws that are holding it on. A lot of people tend to think there's
nothing you're losing.
Right.
All right, we're gonna go around the block real quick.
Cool, man. There is a little metal bracket toward the front part of the transmission cover. You'll need a 10mm socket to remove it. Once you've loosened up its fastener, you can just spin it out by hand. It's not real hard, and then push it out of the way and make sure you remember to put it back as you're putting the machine back together. Here I am spinning it out by hand. Spin, 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 keep spinning. Spin, 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 spin. It'll eventually come out, and then I'll show you what this bolt looks like. It's the only 10mm bolt you remove in the process of doing this job. Still spinning. Spin, spin, spin. Here we go. There it is. Look at it in all of its glory. Don't forget to put it back. Don't forget to tighten it back up. So the last step before we get the transmission cover off is I need to remove the center bolt. That one is a little bit longer than the rest of them, so it's pretty obvious where it goes. One thing I forgot to mention the first time I recorded this video is that there's a little slot on the back of the transmission housing that once you have all of the fasteners removed, you can go ahead and put a flathead screwdriver in there and pry it a little bit, and it will pop right off at that point. The front pulley, aka variator, is held on with a 14mm bolt. It is extremely tight. I used an air-actuated impact to remove it, and then I'm using an electric impact to reinstall it. I'm sure there is a proper torque rating, quote-unquote, for the variator pulley and the clutch pulley. I've found that just a few ugga-duggas with an impact does it just fine. They don't tend to fall off. If you're that worried about it, put a tiny bit of blue Loctite on the threads before you run it in there with an impact. And of course, stop short of stripping it, because if you strip that front pulley, that's your crankshaft, and you're going to have an extremely bad time, so be very careful with it. If you want to go whole hog and do it the quote-unquote exactly the right way, you're going to need something to hold the crankshaft in place while you torque that bolt. You're likely going to need a friend's help or some kind of breaker bar to hold it against the ground while you tighten it up. But like I said, just reinstalling them using an impact, just using common sense, ugga-dugga, Guten tight kind of torque, that's fine on these. You don't have to overthink it. And here we have the belt that I'm going to be installing on this bike. It's an aftermarket belt. It's not the OEM Honda belt. The reason we decided to go with the aftermarket one was because it was a lot cheaper than the OEM belt, and the customer is willing to take the risk for the savings. You might be wondering which way the belt goes on. I always position it so that I can read the logos from the top part of the belt when it is installed on the bike. So the first step to installing a belt on a scooter is crunching down the clutch mechanism and pushing the belt as far toward the center as we can get it. When you install the belt on a scooter, it will be very loose until the engine starts spinning, and then it'll tighten up on its own. You'll see how that works here in a minute. In the meantime, watch me struggle trying to get the belt as far into the center as I possibly can before I slide the clutch onto the input shaft for the transmission. There we go. It's on there. Moves freely. Before we do that, I'm going to pop the inner part of the variator back on. There we go. And once that's there, now I can go ahead and slide the rear pulley on with the belt fitted. And as you can see, it's extremely loose on the front pulley. This might be something that'll worry you if you're not used to doing this, or if this is your first time. You just leave the belt loose. It will tighten up once you start the bike and give it a little bit of a rev. Next step is fit the little spacer, followed by the nut for the input shaft of the transmission. Once I have that screwed down by hand, I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up using an impact, get it good and tight. Once I do that, I'm going to fit the drive face for the variator onto the crankshaft. Make sure that it is seated all the way up against the bushing for the variator. Don't go running the bolt in with the drive face crooked or not all the way seated against the crankshaft, or you could potentially break something. So you'll see me be pretty careful, making sure that drive face is all the way down against the crankshaft. And then I'm going to go for a little tiny itty bitty bit of blue Loctite. I'm going to smear a little bit of that onto the front bolt, and then I'm going to come back with the impact and a 14mm socket, and I'm going to run the bolt in and get it gut and tight. We call that German torque. That's a technical term used by professionals. Once I get the drive face and the variator all tightened up against the crankshaft, I'm going to look around, see where the transmission cover ran off to, pick it up, and I'm going to make sure that we still have the little dowel pins in the two places that they go. So here's the first one right there, and then the second one is on the opposite side, kind of diagonal. Sometimes these fall out, sometimes they stay inside the actual engine side of the transmission case. But these are still there, so we don't have to go looking for them. So we'll go ahead and pop the transmission cover back on, and then run all of its bolts back in and finish this job. So installation is the reverse of disassembly. So you just do all the steps in reverse to put the machine back together. You can see me struggling a little bit with that front metal bracket that fits onto the transmission cover using a 10mm screw. I'm going to struggle with that for a few seconds, getting the screw pushed through the bracket, and then I'm going to tighten it down as far as it'll go. You won't see me tighten this all the way up on camera, but I did tighten it up off camera. Once you get that tight, there are a whole bunch of 8mm bolts that need to go back in to hold the transmission cover on. The torque spec for these is no doubt somewhere between 8 and 12 foot-pounds, which is about as tight as you can get it using, one hand and a 3/8 inch ratchet. And then a few of them are different sizes, so you'll want to test fit them and make sure that the screw isn't poking out too far or that it's not all the way in. There are a few different sizes, so you have to make sure that the bolt goes back in the hole where it came out from. Not real hard to do. You can just test fit the screws, and it's pretty obvious where each one of them goes. And here you can see me running into a situation where one of the bolts went in too far, so that called for a longer bolt to go in there. I think there's 2 long bolts on this transmission cover. One of them goes more toward the front. The other one goes like all the way in the back, if I remember right. Anyway, I'm going to run them in with an impact, and then I'll do final torque using a 3/8 inch ratchet. Another thing I want to talk about before we finish this video up, I didn't talk about it when I fitted the transmission cover back onto the engine, but you really need to make sure that transmission cover fits flush on the engine before you go running its fasteners on. The input shaft for the transmission, basically the back pulley, that shaft needs to fit pretty precisely inside a machined hole on the back of the transmission cover. If it gives you any trouble, just fit it as best you can and then wiggle it and push on it until it pops in and finds its home and fits flush against the engine. Now that I have final torque on the 8mm fasteners for the transmission housing, I'm going to go ahead and fit the plastic shroud, starting with the rear one. Reverse is, or installation is the reverse of disassembly. So we're going to start with this rear cover. We will run its fasteners on there, and then once that's installed, we'll install the front cover, and then start the bike, make sure the rear wheel moves, take it for a test ride, make sure it feels the way it should feel. Other things I did in the process of doing this job, I did take the variator apart. So I looked at the rollers. They had no flat spots on them. In fact, they looked brand new. I think this bike only has about 15,000 miles on it. Wait, 11,000 actually. So those all looked good. And then the clutch looked fine. The springs still felt good. The little brake shoe things that grab onto the clutch bell, those looked good too. So pretty much all that needed to happen to this bike was just it needed all of the old belt particles and pieces pulled out of there, and then a fresh belt installed. And then the owner will be off to the races, commuting back and forth to work on his Maxi scooter again.
Yeah. Thank you so much again, my brother.
You are welcome, man. We gotta try firing it up. Riding it.
You got to press it pretty tight. Oh, yeah.